Oh, 3, 2, 1. We're all going Scott's views today. Well, welcome back to this is I think it's part 5 of the state of psychotherapy and our discussion of postmodernism. We've done a couple of discussions. I've got Dr. Brent Potter here and Michael Mantas. Brent is from South Carolina and Michael is from Michigan. So if you'd just like to introduce yourself, guys, for the people who's watching. Brent?
I'm Brent. I'm a clinician. I've been in the field of behavioral health in a lot of different capacities for roughly 27 years, I think. And I've written books, I speak sometimes, and continue a very lively psychoanalytic practice.
Great, thank you. And Michael?
Yes, my name is Michael Mantas, and I am a retired clinician. I'm in publishing and politics currently, working in the area of using my background in psychology to bring enlightenment and hopefully help people wake up in terms of the political events happening in the world currently.
Oh, that's good. And it's great. It's great to have you both here, having this transatlantic connection of what's going on in the world. I think it's very important. And so last time we met, we discussed a little bit about this book, Explaining Postmodernism by Stephen Hicks, and Scepticism and Socialism from Rousseau to Foucault. A very interesting book. And you know, perhaps we might get him on at some point to discuss some of his ideas. And I've picked out a couple of bits in the book to try and get us going on some of the sort of things that are important to us, especially in the sort of psychological realm, therapeutic realm, perhaps. And I mean, it's a very interesting book. It's very scholarly. It's very in depth. His knowledge of all the different eras of philosophy is quite daunting to look at. He's obviously done his research, and when I was reading this book, this is very interesting. When I was reading the book, it reminded me, because of this postmodernism trend has been filtering around, not just for the last couple of years, it's been decades in the making. And I'm just seeing the speaker view. Oh yeah, that's okay. It's been decades in the making, and of course we've all lived in it, and it's very difficult to see the woods from the trees when you're in it. That's what I've kind of come to consider, seeing what's happening in Scotland now, that with the COVID thing, people are kind of unable to see the I mean, it sounds a bit arrogant, but the error of their ways in believing all the kind of postmodernist ideology and accepting it unquestioningly, and not just reading about Hicks, but I think he does mention postmodern art in the book. But when I was 21, right, 21, I left school with virtually no qualifications, and I became a racing cyclist, and that was what I wanted to do. So I went to France, and I was racing I raced in France for 3 years, and I lived in quite a large town called Clermont-Ferrand in central France, in the Massif Central mountains region. And this Clermont-Ferrand, interestingly enough, it's pertinent to our discussion. That's where Michel Foucault was a lecturer for a while there. the great queer theorist and postmodernist, right, that Stephen Hicks talks about. And the team that I raced for, the team manager, he had a son, well, 2 sons, but I was friendly with both. Then they were both students at Clermont-Ferrand University. And so when I arrived in January, February 1991, so I went out to the pub a few times with these 2 guys, and they said, "Oh, come along to the university one night. There's an arts festival on, and it's like kind of film and things like that. Come along and have a look." And we went to this lecture theatre, and it was like a cinema screen. And it was all these, I was quite intimidated by all these students, very intellectual and arty type people, and kind of, I was just a kind of a jock, so to speak, in the American term, being a cyclist. And I just remember distinctly remembering the screen. It was basically a camera looking up at a guy's bottom, and he was either shitting or breaking wind, and you know, you'd see his anus and all what's going on, and this was meant to be art, you know. This was meant to be groundbreaking. This was meant to be challenging, breaking boundaries, and you know, some people were laughing, but other people were, all the sort of intellectual types were like, very intriguing, you know, whatever kind of weird postmodern ideas they were coming out with. My French wasn't that great at that time. It's better now, but I didn't have much opinion on it really. I was just there for the alcohol and drinking, you know, and maybe meeting some nice French women, but that was all really. But it, because of this, decades later, fast forward, I can realize this kind of very dark, nihilistic form of art and postmodern art is utterly very destructive ultimately. And so I just wanted to bring that in and take us back to the book, because and it is back to Michel Foucault, and this is in the chapter explaining postmodernism, what modernism is. Michel Foucault, he says, this is Hicks. Foucault has identified the major targets. All my analyses are against the idea of universal necessities in human existence. Such necessities must be swept aside as baggage from the past. It is meaningless to speak in the name of or against reason, truth, or knowledge. And he goes on, if there is no world or self to understand and get right on their terms, then what is the purpose of thought or action? Having deconstructed reason, truth, the idea of the correspondence of thought to reality, and then set them aside, reason, writes Foucault, is the ultimate language of madness. There is nothing to guide or constrain our thoughts or feelings, so we can do or say whatever we feel like. Deconstruction, Stanley Fish confesses happily, relieves me of the obligation to be right and demands only that I be interesting. And he goes on, many postmodernists, though, are less often in the mood for the aesthetic play than for political activism. Many deconstruct reason, truth, and reality because they believe that in the name of reason, truth, and reality, Western civilization has wrought dominance, oppression, and destruction. Reason and power are one and the same. Jean-Francois Lyotard states, both lead to and are synonymous with prisons, prohibitions, selection process, the public good. Postmodernism then becomes an activist strategy against the coalition of reason and power. Postmodernism, Frank Lentrichia explains, seeks not to find the foundation and the conditions of truth, but to exercise power for the purpose of social change. The task of postmodern professors is to help students spot, confront, and work against the horrors, the so-called horrors of the West and of one's time. And so he goes, like, these horrors, according to postmodernism, are most prominent in the West, where reason and power have been the most developed. But the pain of these horrors is neither inflicted nor suffered equally, according to the postmodernists. Males, whites, and the rich have their hands in the whip of power, and they use it cruelly at the expense of women, racial minorities, and the poor. I'll put a question mark next to that. I'll stop the quotes there, but it's pertinent to what I've talked about with the art thing. You know, this destruction of art. You know, so you can. where I worked, I had a consulting room in Edinburgh. I've left it now because it closed down because of lockdown. It kind of basically went out of business, so I had to find another consulting room. But there was the old veterinary college in Edinburgh, just down where my consulting room was, and they turned it into a cafe and kind of art gallery and art workspaces. And one day I was walking by it. It was a real pompous place. Expensive coffee, expensive cake, trying to be all woke, as woke. So I know what I don't know if you know the word what woke means. It's kind of like postmodern, fashionable thing. And I walked by it, and it was just like a collection of junk next to the fence of the building, and inside the fence, old gates and buckets and cans of beer and paint pots and anything. And I actually thought, what's that junk sitting there? It was art. It was an art piece. And I took a picture of it. And I thought, this is utterly crazy. I mean, my 4-year-old son could just get a bit of junk and throw it outside and go, well, that's art. That is this kind of raison d'etre of postmodern world and reflected in art like that, and in a lot of music as well, I think, is very it's very indicative of what is going on. So it's like this utter deconstruction, as Hicks talks about. It's so prevalent, and yet so-called intelligent people like these people in Clermont-Ferrand, all these students of the future who are who'll be going into professions, to government and science and institutions and philosophy and psychology, they were sitting there thinking, this is great. And it's, when you think about it, when you look at it in the hard, cold light of day, it is quite frightening. And so I'll stop there because I've blabbed on, but it is quite shocking, I think.
Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Brett.
Oh, no, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, my undergrad was at an art college, and my first career was in the arts. I'm an illustrator, commercial artist, graphic designer, but went to a school where there was a big fine art department in Detroit, the Center for Creative Studies. And, it's an interesting process. I spent a lot of time looking at a lot of art, making a lot of art. When I moved from the arts into psychology and started to understand or look at more deeply, what the process was and what the goal was. And now here we are talking about this, and I see this deconstructive process, which is a part of any creative process. But you just mentioned, you just read those quotes that spoke to the nihilism at the heart as the goal, as opposed to what we've abandoned as the goal of art, which is beauty, the order, the creative process instead of the destructive process. And I think, to me, that's a key part of what we're seeing. We're seeing the goal of the art process, as well as the living process, moving towards, in postmodernism, moving towards deconstruction, towards nihilism, towards disorder, towards chaos, as opposed to back towards beauty. We're not referring upward or transcendently towards some greater order. We're referring
There you go. I'm recording now.
Oh, there we go. Brent, you mentioned your experience with the indoctrination that you had to go through. Bruce, you've mentioned the insanity of the responses to these people that needed to be, the immigration issues that needed to be resolved, and people were simply rebelling against that. This nature of rebellion against rationality towards that that death cult image that and what that looks like. And to me, that's the nature of, we talk about it in a Christian sense as the enemy. We can talk about it with a small e enemy. We can talk about it as it expresses as Marxism. We can talk about it, what is the nature of that? And that to me, that's where both I'm interested in going, and also where it seems I have to go, because I can't describe a vacuum of rationality. We can see what people are moving away from, but what are they moving towards, and what does that mean for us? Because that is a present autonomous dynamic in our culture. That's, there's that old saying that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was to make people believe he's not there. Well, we have a big black hole that we're not even looking at, that we're looking away from in our culture. That's what that is. It's just interesting. Dennis Prager talks about evil not being darkness, but being light, being so bright that you can't look directly at it, which is interesting too, just in terms of, say, the imagery in Genesis, where the serpent, the whole nature of the scales of the serpent. I can't remember the actual etymology, but there's the word that has to do with brightness and shining. The shining one, maybe it was, the scales of the serpent are shiny and hard to look at. And that kind of beauty, which also comes back to and relates to the Psyche and Eros story, where there's such a danger that it's so bright that you can't look directly at it, and so you don't see it. And the nature of the enemy is, I think, what we're being asked to determine in all this, in this entire process. And here we are trying to discern that, whereas many people are moving away from it. But we see it, that it's there, and we see that there's the death cult, and that people are sacrificing to it, and they've been gripped by this enemy, and they're not even aware of it, which is frightening.
Jung talks about this. I was surprised. I'm really diving back into the Jungian world, and so going back to some of his basic writings, and he, as far as I can tell, I mean, man, Michael, you and I have probably one way or another studied Jung for many decades now, in one way or another, whether it was through Jim or through, I mean, so many of the thinkers of the Dallas School, but Jung basically says it's a creed. And he's talking about a state, sort of communism or socialism. He talks about it as a creed, sort of like a religion, which I didn't know about because when I was like, I think it's a cult, but he says it's a creed, and he sort of thinks of it as being the flip side to when the political right goes insane and says it has to be our way. We're going to jam our Christianity down your throat, which has happened. For sure, in history, that it's kind of like it's a religion. Here are our religious beliefs, and they're not religious beliefs, they're really reality. And so we need to help you come to terms with reality. But that doesn't explain kind of the archetypal or supernatural dimension to it. I think that it is a kind of, Jung said at the core of every archetype is a god. And this is certainly a god that is very invested in chaos, destructiveness, a sort of loosening or obliteration of all boundaries. And that is a force that's moved throughout history and seems most contagious in youth populations. Not always, but for sure in youth populations. And I think that it is a kind of Elohim. It's another kind of, in Michael Heiser terms, which I know we're both like well versed in. I listen to him a couple hours a day. It's weird, but wonderful. Yeah, he's a smart man. But I do think that there is a kind of archetypal, supernatural, organizing dimension to this, because the product of this is a youth population, and by that I'm going to say, maybe 14 to 26 or something to that effect. who's really just, when you speak to them, it's hard even for me to take them seriously as even a philosophical opponent, because I see their repeated use of they to refer to their genderless, boundary-free lover, and things like that is really just, no, I can't really take it serious. I see it more as like how each youthful population has its own rebellious, each generation has its own rebellious thing. It's producing a generation of people that aren't interested in really in reading, writing, because if there's nothing there, if there's no shoreline, there's no guiding anything, then why not just, why read? Why study anything? Why, the only thing that really matters is the revolution, the pronoun battles, the language battles, the identity politics battles. They're very invested in that, but outside of that, just see everything around them is in the service of being destroyed to that mission. And it's producing, in my opinion, a very weak generation, because they don't stand up for anything. They have nothing to stand up for other than just destroying everything. It's wild to watch.
It is redemptive in the sense that, we're, as humans, it makes me think of Frankl and the search for meaning and that entire movement. Underneath this, as we talk, it does kind of come into some clarity that underneath this is that search for something meaningful, for something Campbell might call the adventure, or what Jung would call individuation, through this process that the enemy, I'm going to use the word the enemy, has understood that there's an instinct for meaning, which ultimately is the instinct for God, that this enemy has usurped in people and stepped into that place where God is. And I suppose that's the nature of the rebellion that you're talking about in the youth, is that it's the nature of rebellion itself. The enemy is actually rebellion against God, against order, against, good, against creation. And it seems like, at least, and maybe this is my own desperation, for all of us, or these folks in particular, that there is something redemptive, that they're looking for some kind of meaning. But how do we shift that? How do we shift that breakneck lemming movement over the edge of the cliff back towards something meaningful and good, as opposed to meaningful and bad? I don't know the answer to that, but it's harrowing to watch and hard to be a part of.
What springs to mind here? It reminds me of what Alexander Solzhenitsyn said. He said in his warnings to the West that, what's happened is you've forgotten God. What's happening is there's the loss of religious sensibility in your culture. He's seen this in the 1970s, and he said it. He said this is not a good thing. It's not going to end well. And well, of course, it's been quite prophetic, I suppose. It makes me think also of Timothy Leary, for example, the great counterculture figure. Tune in, turn on, burn out kind of idea. It is, with the loss of God, with no God there, with God being killed, so to speak, metaphorically, literally, whatever. When you've got no moorings, you've just cut off the moorings of Western civilization, and you're like left bereft. And what else can you do? Just blow your brains out with some LSD, or drink, or cigarettes, or anything. Blow one's brains out, and of course, this philosophy, postmodernism, for some, I think, it gives them a sense of perhaps there's meaning in it, but it's utterly nihilistic at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And you can see a kind of haunting, what the hell's happening to me in some of these people. I think because I think ultimately they know it is maybe bankrupt. You know, when you point things out to them, like for example, they want to give the COVID vaccine to women who are of childbearing age, you know, and these young men with rainbow stickers in their Twitter profiles with their pronouns and they, them, and all that, and Black Lives Matter, and you point out to them, well, these women, this drug, there's no long-term data on what the effects on fertility. It's under experimental trial at the moment. It's under emergency authorization. These are women. Women were one of the groups that you were supporting not long ago, and yet you're wanting them to take a vaccine that might potentially damage their fertility. And then they just go quiet. They just go. I've had several conversations like that with people, and they don't even engage. They don't want to engage because essentially it gets like a spanner in the works. But in a more positive note, perhaps this very dark time we're in now, maybe there's an inevitability. Maybe it's kind of needed to a certain extent, in as much as that to get back to our moorings of a society where it's in touch with the transcendent, with God, I think, or something like that. There has to be this clash, because it makes me think of the last two anti-lockdown rallies I went to. There was a Pastor Arthur O'Malley. I don't know if I've seen anyone the videos.
Yes, yeah.
Fantastic speech. I mean,
he's really good.
Right? Yeah. And I met him. I spoke to him afterwards. I mean, what a wonderful man. But I was looking at the people in the crowd, and I was in the crowd listening to them speak, and the people were just soaking it in. They were craving it. People were moved in a way I've never seen people moved, and not particularly probably church-going people or anything like that. But there was a definite thirst, and I kind of thought, you know, because when you look at the Soviet Union, because of the horrors that occurred there, and religion was suppressed, and you know, they wanted to destroy religion like they want to destroy it now. Of course, it didn't work. What happened was there was a rebound effect where a spirituality and a religious sensibility to the world became even stronger. I mean, when I've been to the old Eastern Bloc, and I've met people who lived under Soviet communism, it's such an important aspect of their worldview. You know, it's such an important, you know, the therapists that I've met, you know, their brand of kind of psychotherapy is infused with biblical ideas and references to theological ideas. It's so present, and you know, I think, you know, that's maybe this is a kind of, I don't know. I think it is a battle. We're in a battle between good and evil. I think it is satanic. I think it is occultist. What's happening? There's so many elements of it. I don't, you know, and I don't think you have to get into conspiracy theory. I just made a video yesterday talking about a Russian philosopher that I've come across called Ivan Kirievsky, who was from Russia, and he talks about the kind of highlighting the things that Stephen Hicks misses out about the. He's quite critical of the Enlightenment and these rationalist philosophers that Hicks kind of says were the bedrock of Western civilization. He's quite critical of it in as much as that this Enlightenment and the Renaissance and all that, it took away from a kind of the roots of ancient Christianity. It took away from this the practices of the ancient Greeks, the hesychasm, you know, the Jesus prayer, you know, the intellectual and rational thought is not enough. It is important, of course, for certain aspects of life, but there's something else. So in the religious sense, there is a kind of, they keep reason at a very healthy distance when it's needed, but they're aware of some very supernatural, spiritual dimension to the world. But it's rooted in God. It's got rooted in the ancient Christianity. It's rooted in the Bible. But these postmodernists rejecting reason, they've got nothing but death and destruction. That's it. That's all they've got. It's a one-way street. Whereas the Christian perspective, it's not going down the one-way street. It's going to somewhere very much more creative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, not in defense of the Enlightenment, but in defense of Hicks, I suppose he does differentiate pretty well between the German and French aspects of the Enlightenment and the attempt of the Germans to rescue religion by making a clear demarcation between rationality and irrationality, whereas on the more French side of the Enlightenment, they basically threw out irrationality, for reason, whereas on the German side, they wanted to include them both, so they clearly differentiated them. So there is that aspect that Hicks talks about in the Enlightenment. I understand his criticisms of much of the Enlightenment and agree with him, especially in terms of, well, I guess directly American history and the direct connection between the Enlightenment and the American experiment. So I think it's important to make that differentiation, not just give a yay or a nay to the Enlightenment, but to, just like anything, when we look closely at it, there's differentiation and discernment and demarcation in the whole process. So I guess just as a point of reference, I think that's something important to remember.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I was also, this is walking back a little bit, but to kind of Bruce's point about how, or even yours, Michael, you mentioned prior, to turn this around. I'm not sure. Hicks has some ideas about postmodernism sort of going away, which I find very optimistic. But I recently saw a bit, it's a little bit dated, but nonetheless relevant, I think, and pretty factually supported. Have you seen the documentary Demographic Winter?
No.
I know of it, but have not watched it yet. Yeah.
Heiser, that's where I picked it up, as Heiser says, you guys have got to see this. Basically, it's a sociological sort of financial look at what's happening with, there's no such thing as overpopulation at all, that humans are bad, we're destroying the planet, it's overpopulated, which isn't to say we haven't caused destruction or that it's not like we should just do whatever we want, but it's a series of very respected, well-researched sort of statistics and trajectories around where certain populations are going as being unsustainable, which creates all kinds of issues that I had no idea about, like when you have more elderly people in the culture than you have young, what does that do financially to certain things like Social Security and this, and how do you fund this, and what happens, and it takes more people out of the family. I mean, it's a startling and sort of chilling look at what happens when populations don't sustain themselves. And many of them are on a downward trajectory, which is leading to all kinds of horrible things that actually make financial situations, poverty, family structure worse and worse and worse and worse. And how to pull out of that is a tough one to think about. because these things are already set in motion, and these populations are already seeing in Europe, Asia, believe it or not, in some places, like we just can't, we're running out of people, and certain populations in Europe will just go away if the trend continues. And I can't help but think again that it's sort of a question. Oh, and then they look at why that is, which would of course be abortion is a big one, and also views of sex, like the activity sex, the way that men take up sex now versus in history, and just sort of postmodern views of the family as an evil structure, views on divorce. I mean, they go on, and they're not Christian based at all. As far as I know, these are university professors and research scientists. But it seems to me that time and time again, the sort of hermeneutic theme that emerges is that of the family. That if the nuclear family is not preserved, if that image in kind of an archetypal sense is not preserved, then there's just nothing. Things go literally straight to hell. And at the core of all of it, it's the family, whether it's gay marriage, which there was that great talk, I think I sent Bruce on YouTube, where there was, who was it? Wayne Grudem, and it was a Scottish pastor talking about how, looking at the history of that and saying it actually had they didn't want to get married for the longest time. There was a lot of rebellion against the marriage as an institution. There seems to be a motivation to disrupt the family system. And then all of a sudden gay marriage became important. But there's all kinds of things that seem to really be just a continued attack on the family, whether it's women's roles, that if you're a stay-at-home mom, you're setting women back decades, to the way sex is viewed by men, to just the availability of abortion, the convenience of divorce, just all of these things. Or, you know, if you're like 52 genders and need to be referred to as they, I mean, how does one wonders how a family can organize and sort of mobilize around such dynamic things? But it seems to be the family time and time again. If we could recover the importance of family in some kind of fashion, I suspect that that would be hugely helpful. But it's hard for me to think about how to turn around this train that we're on, because already it's set in motion. Like the demographic winter thing is sort of like population trends, something that happens on views on the family starting in 1970s that now in 2021 sort of still continues. And the views of family have not improved since the 70s.
Let's hope that what Jung says about a few people being able to redeem the world is accurate, because as we and whatever other little cells of people are focusing on these questions in the world, are we giving attention and energy to the right direction? You know, you mentioned that I'd love to hear more from Stephen Hicks about his notion that postmodernism will pretty much extinguish itself, because that's hopeful to me, in the sense that when we're bewildered about how this all came about so suddenly and so autonomously and so out of nowhere, and perhaps if it vanishes that way, then it does compel us to talk about things on that archetypal level, that we are not in control of any of these greater movements. Yet at the same time, if we focus attention, consciousness, awareness, we can perhaps, like, you know, a dam can change the direction of a river, but not completely get rid of the river. We can change some direction and some movement, and awareness is the key. Even if we don't have the answer, simply attention and awareness can help us move towards, maybe faster, towards the extinguishment of these ideas and what has gripped people in this. Not that there won't be some other form that people will be gripped by, because aren't we always moving? I mean, isn't that the message of any messianic structure of which our culture is based on, particularly Christianity? Isn't that the message that there is always, the end is always near? And so doesn't, as we were talking about earlier, doesn't that drive us to pay attention to what brings life, what is at the center, instead of where things are falling apart?
That's a very Heideggerian sort of look at it, with his whole "only a God can save us." You know, he felt that these sorts of things were so incredibly out of control, and in its etiology out of our control at all, in a human sense, that to think that these are human constructions is a real error. And so he said, only a God can save us. And what we can do, he said, was something like meditative thinking and releasement to the things themselves, which I think is sort of his cryptic way of saying that we need to prepare. We can prepare a way. We can prepare an opening. We can be engaged in the kind of thinking that is appropriate to the coming of that other archetype that may help us. And yeah, you're right. Jung had an excellent point that, you know, there was one Jesus who seemed to do plenty, and that we don't need like millions and millions of people. It's sort of hard for me to imagine, but I really hope Heidegger and Jung's solution are correct.
Well, if you look at back to what I said about Russia when the stuff under communism, and what Hicks said, that he thinks it might extinguish itself. If you look at the Russian model under communism, I suppose the political developments that happened there and the resurgence of a Christian thought, if you look at that as a model, perhaps you know, a kind of rejection of it occurs under these conditions where you know, the ludicrous socialist the ludicrous death, you know, the socialist desire for death and nihilism, perhaps it burns out to a certain extent, and so maybe Hicks has a point there. I think, you know, that there could be that historical kind of cycle to it. But what worries me, because of course I think his book was written before COVID-19. With the COVID-19 thing, and I suppose also the climate crisis, with the vaccine thing, that this kind of let's vaccinate the whole world, and the implications of that. Oh, it says I'm running out of time again. That's bizarre.
Yeah, it says remaining time is less than 10 minutes.
What I'll do, I'll stop when it goes out. I'll start it again. We'll have 3 different videos, and I'll join them together for the final. But so yeah, so with the COVID-19 vaccine, what is the implications of having everyone full of this new technology and the desire for digital currency? Are they going to tie us up in some sort of technological pharmaceutical nightmare where the possibility of getting out in it will be much more difficult? The technology is much better than it was under Soviet communism or any sort of form of communism. My fear is that it's got a, you know, how can, because this evil, this drive to the Thanatos, so to speak, how can we protect ourselves or rebound from it if all the means are disposal or taken away? I mean, with regard to the climate crisis, the whole thing of stopping farmers farming, there's the you know, food supplies drying up, there's the stopping people living in the countryside, getting smart cities, digital currency, social credit systems, the means for escape. Well, essentially what I'm trying to say is that it feels like they're trying to shut down any avenue for this possible extinguishing of this postmodern death cult.
Yeah, they're dancing pretty fast to try and keep the process going and not move toward judgment. I agree. You know, it's interesting. I saw video here in the States of a newscaster. There was some chef on who was teaching, showing the newscaster how to eat insects. Here in the States, we have an insect called the cicada, and every 17 years it comes out of dormancy. And that's happening now. So this news segment was about how to eat cicadas. And it also ties in very closely to the environmental movement, or the green movement, or the existential crisis movement that they're always yelling about, their existential crises, that we shouldn't be eating meat. And so there's this underlying subtext of we need to eat insects to get our protein and not meat. And there's something about that imagery, just metaphorically, when you look at, we're moving away from the meat to the insects. I mean, that's an interesting movement. You know, you have the imagery of the satanic imagery of insects, of flies, of other insects, as opposed to you know, the true meat, the blood and the body, you know, the bread and there's some movement there that's interesting in terms of the imagery that they want us to shift our perspective to that insect imagery. It just reminds me of, you know, what you're speaking about, Bruce, in terms of you know, they don't want that movement to be extinguished. And then there's that entire psychological imagery of it makes me think of like the movie The Exorcist, where there was a lot of insect imagery and the kind of notion of vermin, and that ties also to the, you know, the notion of the Nazi notion of Jews as vermin, and the notion of, you know, the communist notion of the proletariat as vermin, as something not important, as something
parasitic.
Yeah, absolutely. Parasitic. That's exactly the term.
The image that came to mind for me was, I think his name was Renfield from Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yep.
The guy who sits in the cell and just eats bugs and vermin, waiting for Dracula to come and kind of save him somehow.
Boy, that's a metaphor, Brent. That's a great image for what's happening, isn't it? I mean, Bruce just talked about that extinguishment. Seems like there's an entire generation, or more than generation, more than half a population of the world that's sitting in their cell, eating bugs, waiting for the master.
And happy doing it, like in their element. Like, that's Renfield's fine with that. He chose that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, that strange heap
because
of
he was promised death and eternal life, if I remember right. Like Dracula says, I can make you like me.
Yes.
Which is a lie, but yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no.
What a horrible image. I mean, and it's an image, you know, you imagine in the future, the smart city, people sitting there eating their grubs, you know, or mealworms. And, you know, not having any relationships. Just sitting on a computer, no social interaction, not allowed to travel, not allowed to see beauty, not allowed to see the countryside because you haven't got a permit to go into the countryside. Not, you know, not allowed to express any views. You're just, it's what Giorgio Agamben, the very Marxist kind of left-wing academic in Italy, who's got a lot of flack for coming out the closet against the lockdown from other people on the left. And he said what this lockdown, and because he knows a lot about fascism that occurred in Italy. He says what's happened with this lockdown, people have been reduced to a bare life, a biological entity, a biohazard. They can't even mourn. We can't even mourn our dead properly. We can't even bury them properly. Just existing. That's not a human life. That's the character in Dracula sitting eating bugs in his cell waiting for the master.
And if you can reduce humans to just an alimentary canal, just something that eats and shits as it waits for the dark master to give it some kind of immortality that isn't even real in its own right, then why not just wipe that, as Brent said, parasitic race off the planet? Why not wipe ourselves off the planet?
Postmodernism is kind of creating a demand and filling it a little bit.
Yep. It's a good technique.
Scheme. You know, there's like these pyramid schemes. It's like, well, some people would say psychoanalytic schools are kind of like that. You know, you get all the analysts in the school, and you have to get all these new trainees coming on, but they have to be analysis 5 times a week.
I know, right?
Right?
It's totally, yeah.
It's not real analysis, and then they become qualified, and they get more trainees coming. They're 5 times a week. Psychoanalysis suffers from that quite badly, I think.
Yeah, the tuition is affordable, but you need to see, like, you know, you need to see Bob to be your supervisor. You need to see Julie to be supervisor number 2. You got to see that dude to be your supervisor. Then you need your own training analyst. And yeah. It's like you have to pay everyone at the school every week.
And everyone,
5 times.
Everyone's so incessant. Everyone's in analysis, and there's no outside world. They're sitting in the cell waiting for the interpretation.
Waiting for our turn. Wait, I want to be a senior psychoanalyst. Where's my money? What happened?
Right. I must have a guardian angel, because just like I was rescued by my guardian angel post high school from seminary, when I had it in my head that I was going to Zurich and I was going to go through training analysis in Zurich, the Jung Institute. I had actual Jungians, actual analysts tell me, don't go, Michael, because if you do, the institution will do its work on you. And that's not what we want for you. You know, you see something that shouldn't be institutionalized. And so I think, you know, I guess I should have some pity for you folks who were sacrificed at the
weren't
altar,
smart enough,
and I managed to escape it somehow by some guardian angel. So,
all right, we got less than a minute left. The timer says. Do you want to just stop it and start it again, Bruce?
I'll let it play out, and then
okay,
and then I'll start it again. I've never known this to happen before. I don't know why I've had to upgrade, but yeah. Well, I mean. Yeah, we lucky escape for perhaps, Michael. Lucky escape for you to.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, there is a certain element of the cult. Okay, we're back on the air after another Zoom malfunction there. So, getting back to the thing about the postmodernists, their desire for death, heading towards nihilism, rejection of reason. I wanted to touch upon a kind of more religious, spiritual aspect. You know, not that I'm an expert in this area, and Hicks doesn't mention much about this in his book, but I think some of the material is very interesting in regard the early Christian fathers, for example, and their critique of rationalization and intellectualization, etc., and the role spirituality in the church plays. And this is a wonderful book. That's another one there. I hope that's. Sorry, I'll just stop that. I hope it's recorded all this, but never mind. We'll have to wait and see. Essentially, this is Orthodoxy as a therapeutic, Orthodox Psychotherapy, the Science of the Fathers. Quite an interesting book. And this is, according to St. John of Christendom, Paul is the one who upholds the churches of God and heals men through spiritual admonitions, distributing the bread of offering to each one. And it goes on, in St. John Christendom's interpretation of this parable, it's clearly evident that the church is a hospital which heals those sick with sin, while the bishops and priests like the Apostle Paul are the healers of the people of God. And in this other wonderful book, it talks about this kind of something other than reason being important in the early church. This book here, and it talks about the idea of the nous in the church, which is it's essentially the heart. The human nous, although it encompasses the notion of the mind, it is not intellect in the modern sense of the word. As it is often translated, it also includes awareness within the psyche. The nature of the nous is that it is the part of the psyche that watches the other parts of the psyche. I wrote about it in an earlier book. The nous is the background to the whole drama of inner Christianity. In that inner view of the Christian drama, the whole struggle between truth and illusion occurs in this hidden place, but is imaged out on the visible world. Whenever we believe the illusions of our mind, truth lies bleeding. When we remember a truth so that illusion is put to flight, trumpets sound in heaven, for even heaven is found through the nous. When we share our illusions with others, the devil has found allies on the field of battle. And when we accept the invented concept as divine truth, the angels are put to flight, and the field is left to dishonor. When nous is made pure and empty of the debris of battle, there is a new heaven and a new earth. This is Revelation 21, verse 21:1. Then we have begun to put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. Only then will the kingdom of man become a kingdom of God in this world. And so it's a very deep exposition of the kind of supernatural aspect of prayer in ancient Christianity, and how it's something deeper than human reason and intellectualization. But it's not in the postmodern sense of anything goes and you just deconstruct everything everyone wants. It's an appeal to the supernatural realm, and I wonder how I mean, I don't know if Michael or yourself, Brent, has any ideas on this. How do you think someone like Stephen Hicks would contemplate these ideas? What would he say to them, to the idea of a supernatural realm?
No. My suspicion is no.
Yeah.
And I don't know him. Like, he was kind enough to say he would appear and talk to us here, but I don't know him. But I've seen a lot of his interviews and his debates. He debates people who are very prominent self-described postmodernist folks, and just sort of from what I glean from that, he's very much on the Enlightenment reason good sort of bandwagon. I don't pick up anything about spiritual, religious, supernatural, anything. I think that may, this is my guess, that may just not be consistent with his sort of worldview. My suspicion, though, too, is that he seems amenable to like conversation. He sees the religious as being potentially and at times a good standing ground, like logically consistent and respecting sort of and will be in dialogue with that, but I don't think he would jump on that bandwagon, if that makes any sense. So he's not anti-religious. Like, he doesn't go that far, like, therefore atheism, therefore anti-Christian, or he seems to respect Christianity as a reasonable position unto itself and will be in dialogue with that sort of reason, but I don't think he would really endorse it himself.
Yeah, if I understand right, he has a tie to objectivism in his career, for lack of a better word. It's really striking, this notion of, he talks about it with Peterson. Peterson talks about it. It's a notion that gets talked about. if we live as if there's a God, if we live as if the structures of religion have some truth, it's beneficial to mankind, even if it's an as if position as opposed to a position of certainty and direct engagement.
That's a really excellent point. And that's like Peterson's stated, I think he believes in God, but he states his position as if, which is very clever and actually very Jungian too, because he's really kind of like a renegade Jungian like Hillman.
Yes, he is. Yes, Peterson, I would say he's both a Jungian and a Christian, and I think he is wise and shrewd in the serpent sense to talk about the as if perspective.
And that's sort of the tack that Jung takes too, which actually makes Jung a little bit more religious than most stated religious people, which is that he goes against the kind of literalism and moralism, saying that there is, whether you like it or not, a God image in you. You're born with that. Now, does that mean you need to go to the altar and be saved like every Friday evening? No. It means you need to sort of figure out your place in that or something like that. So it's not like, and I would hope anyone who watches our videos doesn't get it like a takeaway, like we want to convert everyone because the three of us are Christians. I mean, for me anyway, I feel like it's more important that people sort of struggle with and come to terms with just what is that God image and what does that mean to them in their lives and how they function ethically, morally, et cetera, as a civilian, et cetera. Like just holding that as if space, I think is terribly important, no matter what one literally then does with it.
Yeah. Well, and as Bruce mentioned, we have, whether we're Christian or not, if we're talking about this idea, this central idea that I think is what we're seeing as missing. Bruce mentioned there's this missing piece that gets covered up, and here we are, whether we're Christian or not, pointing to that idea, and the language with which we can talk about that idea happens to be biblical, Judeo-Christian, at least in the West. And so whether we're Christian or not, the notion of bringing Christianity into the discussion is necessary. It is what thing,
Well, and the notion, like how Heidegger, I mentioned this before, but I love Heidegger's saying that no man is without a religion. Exactly. Whether it's going to be something like Christianity or Hinduism or something like that, or or whether you have an inverted shadow religion like postmodernism, you're going to get, or technology, like in a Heideggerian sense, can be your, it's like, at least be aware that what is the God that you worship? How does that God image sort of realize itself in the world? To at least be conscious of that as if space, I think would take us light years in the right direction.
Heidegger as well is interesting because Hicks kind of puts Heidegger under kind of critique in there and places him in the kind of box of one of the early postmodernists. But it's something that I quite like Heidegger in many respects, and I don't quite see him in the way Hicks portrays him, because as far as I was aware, Heidegger was not against technology. He thought technology was very helpful, but he like people like him and Kierkegaard, I suppose they showed the limits of language, the limits of technical thought, and I think Heidegger, as well as Kierkegaard, which is more explicit, did point to a kind of spirituality or a religious notion in the world. I don't think Heidegger doesn't, for me, come across as a kind of nihilist postmodernist.
Right.
Like Hicks.
Some take him that way. Some prominent Heideggers read him that way, unfortunately, like Thomas Sheehan at Stanford. sees Heidegger as like the ultimate nihilist. Hicks, I think, uses Kierkegaard and Heidegger for his own hermeneutic thing
Sure.
that he's trying to work out. So he's accenting certain things about Heidegger's work and Kierkegaard's, but I don't think it paints like the full picture of Heidegger. And yeah, Heidegger was not anti-technology at all. He was very concerned about a technological way of thinking that originates from things outside of the human dimension that we pick up in a way that makes us think it's ours.
That
And
mechanistic mindset.
And framing. So, and Heidegger, I think, in my reading of him, which others would totally disagree with, like Sheehan or probably Bob Stoller-Rose, I think Heidegger really points us in a religious direction.
Yeah. That's what I feel when I read Being in Time and his other works, the book on language and his book on Parmenides. It does, it very much is there's a lot in there which points to kind of from what I've read about the ancient Christianity in the Church Fathers and hesychasm, that there is so much in there that Heidegger seems to be. I don't know if I presume he was very well read in lots of different areas. I know he was
For sure.
He read a lot about Zen and Buddhism and had spoken to people like that. But anyways, I'm looking at the time, guys, and we'll have to wrap up there. But it's been a great conversation. I hope the Zoom things went well. I hope it's all recorded well. It said it was recording and downloading. I hope it hasn't deleted them. I hope not, but we'll see what happens. It'll be a major disaster if those 2 other videos have been dissolved. But I apologize. I was unaware of this Zoom. The change of Zoom has changed its policy since the last time we spoke, it seems like. But I wanted to thank you both again for your time, and we can continue this conversation in the near future, no doubt.
All right, thank you so much, Bruce.
No problem.
Thank you. Have a great day, gentlemen.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.